From the cold, unending void beyond the outer rim, we first detected Sol 3, a world that should have been unremarkable, yet radiated an anomaly our sensors struggled to classify. Its atmosphere churned with violent storms, jagged lightning dancing across the tumultuous clouds like the flare of some ancient, godlike heartbeat. Tectonic plates shifted beneath the crust with a restless impatience, as though the planet itself was alive, writhing under its own gravity. By our strict classifications, it was a Class 13 Deathworld, a designation reserved for planets that obliterate all but the most extreme life forms. And yet, there it was. Life, persistent, defiant. We observed them, fragile, upright bipeds, unarmed, ill-equipped to endure even minor planetary hazards. Their cities rose and fell in a cycle of chaos. Earthquakes flattened structures, volcanic eruptions swallowed entire settlements. Yet they rebuilt, always larger, always more complex. A pattern emerged that unsettled even our most experienced analysts. Humans survived not by logic or precaution, but by an instinctive refusal to surrender. They did not merely endure, they adapted with an almost willful audacity. Their first forays into the skies were clumsy, terrifying in their inefficiency. Crude flying machines splintered midair. Many fell to the jagged earth below. And yet failure never deterred them. Each catastrophe birthed innovation. Observation posts recorded their primitive conflicts, not brutal enough to annihilate them, but coordinated enough to hint at a strange shared intelligence. In the face of danger, humans convened, argued, reconciled, and emerged stronger. Each survival was a spark, each catastrophe a forge. By the time their machines grazed the upper atmosphere, we recorded our first note of alarm. No other species we had cataloged dared challenge gravity with such reckless persistence. Their gaze, even from orbit, burned with chaotic brilliance, an unquantifiable force that defied prediction. Calculations failed to anticipate their instinctual courage, their raw, unyielding will. We realized with a disquieting clarity, this species was different. And in the void beyond, as storms raged below, we knew the first cautionary record was only the beginning. They were fragile, yet they were awake, and the galaxy would soon take notice. Our emissaries arrived under the assumption of inevitability. We carried the weight of eons, fleets bristling with weapons that could obliterate entire continents, technologies that could subjugate planets without a single loss. To us, Sol 3's humans were negligible, fragile, limited, and entirely predictable. We expected compliance, fear, perhaps even awe. What we received instead was defiance. Their initial response was chaotic. Panic swept across their cities like wildfire, screams echoing through fractured streets, smoke rising from collapsed structures, crude barricades and improvised shelters.
And yet, even in their disarray, a pattern emerged, an instinctive improvisation beyond any species we had cataloged. They dismantled what they had, repurposed fragments of wreckage, and struck back with tools born of desperation but wielded with astonishing precision. From orbit, we watched our warships falter. Beam arrays misfired, shields collapsed under seemingly trivial attacks. The humans did not fight as a singular force. They fought as adaptive nodes in a living network, instinctively aware of each other's limits, exploiting terrain, using the environment itself as weapon. Each strike we anticipated to crush them was countered with innovation that defied all known logic. Cranes toppled onto advancing drones, molten slag channeled into traps, explosions, miscalculations, improvisation. They turned every disadvantage into opportunity. Within hours, our own ranks began to fracture under fear. Reports of losses, ships destroyed, boarding teams repelled, swept through command like a virus. We had underestimated not just their resilience, but their creativity, their cunning, their unquantifiable capacity to endure. They were fragile, yet lethally efficient when cornered. And with every setback, their determination intensified, becoming a force we could not contain with conventional calculation. By the time our withdrawal was inevitable, Sol 3 bore the scars of battle, cities flattened, landscapes torn asunder. Yet the humans stood. Whole communities rallied, rebuilt, and improvised defenses even as our fleets vanished into orbit. We documented our first formal assessment, unsuitable for standard galactic assimilation protocols. A term meant to classify danger now carried a note of fascination. These beings survived not because we allowed them to, but because they refused to surrender to any limit, environmental, technological, or logical. And as we departed, a chilling possibility took root among our ranks. If humanity continued, their persistence would not merely challenge us, it might one day surpass us entirely. The first contact had ended in catastrophe, not for them, but for us. And in the void, we recorded it, unblinking, unsettled, and irrevocably aware. The humans were no ordinary prey. Reports came first like murmurs across the void, blips on long-range sensors, anomalies in trade routes, strange energy signatures from distant systems. Humans were expanding, colonies established on hostile worlds, terraforming initiatives that bent the limits of physics and ecology, resource expeditions into regions our intelligence classified as uninhabitable. Each attempt should have ended in ruin, storms that could strip the skin from bone, predators with exoskeletons tougher than any armor, tectonic convulsions that swallowed entire settlements. These were extinction-level events by any reasonable standard, yet they endured. Our observers cataloged their failures in meticulous detail.
Each disaster was recorded, analyzed, and, astonishingly, followed by innovation that exceeded anything predicted by our models. Collapsed settlements were rebuilt, but now with new materials, scavenged from the planet itself. Failed flight programs birthed new propulsion designs. Crops that should have withered in acid rains flourished after a single season of adaptive engineering. Other species, efficient, measured, logical, dismissed humans as reckless fools, creatures incapable of planning, bound to fail. And yet, time after time, the humans defied expectations, adapting instinctively, exploiting chaos as though it were a tool rather than a threat. They encountered predators of lethal proportions, creatures that had wiped out entire species before the humans arrived. And still, the humans studied them, learning weaknesses, building defenses, and ultimately bending the environment to their will. Hostile civilizations with fleets trained for annihilation attempted to halt them. Entirely superior forces were ambushed, diverted, and destroyed by humans who seemed to anticipate moves no algorithm could predict. They fought not with overwhelming force, but with the precision of improvisation. Every trap, every feint, every unexpected tactic was executed with an intuition that made our generals uneasy. And yet, it was not merely combat that unsettled us. Their diplomacy was unpredictable. They forged alliances with former enemies, discarded old friends when necessary, and exploited interstellar politics with instinctual cunning. Their morality, their ethics, their unpredictability, these were weapons as lethal as their crude technology. From our observation posts, we watched them adapt faster than entire bureaucracies of the Galactic Council could respond. They were a living variable that refused to be constrained by probability or precedent. Reports from our scouts, initially clinical and objective, became increasingly urgent. Notes that once described human peculiarities evolved into warnings. Unpredictable, highly adaptive, contagious influence on surrounding systems. Debate erupted among our analysts. Some argued humans were a curiosity, a species to be contained and studied, a minor nuisance in a galaxy otherwise governed by logic. Others whispered darker possibilities, that humans were a contagion, capable of reshaping civilizations, destabilizing centuries of galactic order with nothing more than instinct and willpower. And then interference began. When observers attempted to subtly manipulate human colonies, their response was neither surrender nor panic. Instead, humans improvised chaos as a weapon. Sabotaged supply chains were repaired using entirely different materials. Blockaded systems were freed by unexpected strikes, utilizing environmental hazards, tidal forces, or even local wildlife in ways that should have been impossible. Humans turned every obstacle into advantage. By the time our fleets realized the depth of the disruption, their colonies were stronger, more coordinated, and more resilient than before. We began to see the pattern, the terrifying design of instinct and will intertwined. They survived because they refused to calculate risks the way we did. They trusted ingenuity, improvisation, and cooperation in moments of pure uncertainty. Every failure was a lesson, every setback a catalyst. Humans were not merely adaptable, they were transformative. Entire sectors were quietly reshaped by their presence before any other species could comprehend the implications. For the first time, it was no longer observation alone. Humans demanded response, and every attempt at interference revealed the depth of their chaos mastery. Fleets sent to intimidate were outmaneuvered. Bureaucracies attempting embargoes were circumvented. Hostile species found themselves fighting not armies, but an unpredictable force, capable of anticipating,
exploiting and enduring far beyond conventional strategy. Our councils grew anxious. The outer worlds, once confident and insulated, began to tremble. Intelligence networks cataloged not just human expansion, but human influence, how their presence in one system subtly altered economies, politics, and social structures in neighboring systems. Entire civilizations adapted, either in fear or imitation, simply to survive near them. Some scholars argued this was evolution accelerated, a contagion of ingenuity, perseverance, and reckless courage that no other species could replicate. And yet, for all our scrutiny, we could not predict them. Every calculation, every model, every attempt to foresee their next move failed. Their survival instinct was neither random nor strategic in ways we could quantify. It was elemental, a force of nature incarnate, fluid, reactive, and unstoppable. And like all forces of nature, it could not be controlled, contained, or mitigated without consequence. In quiet observation stations, alien analysts whispered what none dared formalize. If humans continue, if their expansion persists, the galactic hierarchy will be irreversibly altered, not through aggression, but through survival itself. And as fleets repositioned, councils debated containment protocols that might already be obsolete. A chilling realization settled across our species. Interference was dangerous, observation was terrifying, and surrender was impossible. In every recorded sector, one truth emerged with growing clarity. Humans were neither conquerable nor predictable. They were a force of nature that had crossed from a fragile Deathworld to the stars, and their presence was already unsettling the foundations of civilization itself. The outer worlds, the fleets, the empires, they all felt the ripple of humanity's chaotic mastery. And in the deepest reaches of the void, far from Sol 3, our observers paused, recording the inevitable truth. This was no mere species.
This was the beginning of a variable that could not be ignored, a contagion of persistence, ingenuity, and instinct. And as the stars watched, the galaxy began to tremble, unaware that what was coming could not be reasoned with, only endured. It began subtly at first, fleets reporting strange anomalies in contested sectors, orbital outposts logging incursions they could not anticipate, defense grids struck with precision that should have been impossible. We had assumed our technologies, honed over millennia, made us untouchable. Autonomic sentinel fleets, orbital annihilation arrays, planet-cleansing weapon systems, all were designed for efficiency, predictability, and control. And yet, time and again, humans found ways to exploit them. The first reports were met with skepticism. A single starport lost to what appeared to be sabotage, a supply line rerouted through improbable terrain. But then incidents multiplied. Orbital defense grids rendered inert by machines scavenged from debris, autonomous warships incapacitated by electronic pulses of unknown origin, automated defense drones captured, repurposed, and turned against our own lines. Humans had not mastered these technologies, they had improvised around them, turned our instruments of dominance into tools for survival. Our analysts were baffled. Improvisation, intuition, emotional judgment, qualities we had deemed inefficient, primitive, irrelevant in the calculus of galactic warfare, were decisive. Observation posts reported with unease the emergence of human strategies that no algorithm could anticipate. Empathy became a weapon, alliances formed in the crucible of shared loss, trust forged not from treaties, but from understanding. Grief became determination, fear became courage. Entire human colonies faced annihilation-level bombardments and emerged reorganized, resilient, and emboldened. Where we predicted collapse, they improvised. Where we expected panic, they coordinated. Where we assumed logic would dictate retreat, they advanced, exploiting weaknesses we never knew existed. It was not brute strength that made humans formidable, it was adaptability, multiplied by instinct, experience, and emotion. We observed small contingents infiltrate orbital platforms guarded by hundreds of our most advanced sentinels, dismantling systems with tools no one thought possible. Entire fleets were stalled or destroyed by what appeared at first glance to be randomness, but our sensors told another story. It was not chaos, it was instinctive mastery of complexity, a talent for improvisation beyond the constraints of calculation. The galaxy had never seen a species respond this way. Other civilizations measured threats by mass, by energy output, by fleet size. Humans measured threats differently, by understanding the environment, by calculating the emotional and cognitive states of allies and enemies, and by improvising within the chaos of battle itself.
A single human unit with minimal technology could stall a fleet, disrupt a planetary defense grid, and reroute supply lines, all while adapting to variables our most advanced AI systems could not process. Time and again, humans survived encounters that should have been terminal, Planetary bombardments, chemical attacks, orbital sieges, biological agents, entire campaigns designed to eliminate them ended with only partial success. And with every survival, they evolved. Infrastructure that had been destroyed re-emerged stronger, more flexible. Tactical doctrines were rewritten. Where we saw failure, they saw opportunity. Where we saw the impossible, they saw challenge. We began to notice a disquieting pattern. Humans were not merely survivors, they were catalysts. Their presence alone reshaped conflicts. Entire doctrines of warfare had to be reconsidered. Fleets that once moved with predictability were now thwarted by human ingenuity. Empires that had endured millennia of interstellar dominance found themselves exposed, vulnerable, and often irrelevant in the face of humans who refused to submit to logic or precedent. Our archives began to reflect a new reality. Reports no longer spoke of humans as a species to observe. They spoke of humans as a force of nature. Containment strategies were deemed futile, conventional threats ineffective. Our councils debated endlessly, attempting to quantify the unquantifiable, strategize against the unpredictable, suppress the unstoppable. Every calculation failed. Every algorithm was inadequate. Humans could not be contained. Humans could not be predicted. Humans could only be witnessed. And yet, even in the midst of awe, fear permeated our observations. Their adaptability was not a tool for conquest alone. It was transformative. Humans reshaped the very societies they encountered. Trade networks reconfigured, defensive doctrines restructured, entire civilizations were forced to evolve simply to exist near them. Where we expected domination, we observed improvisation. Where we expected submission, we observed innovation. The galaxy began to shift beneath their influence, unbidden, uncontrollable. Emotional intelligence, once dismissed as a weakness, revealed its lethal efficiency. The human's capacity for empathy enabled alliances that other species could not conceive. Understanding of loss bred strategy. Their grief forged resilience. Their fear catalyzed action. We watched as human leaders inspired unity in the face of annihilation, as entire planetary populations coordinated tactics, optimized resources, and repelled threats that should have ended them. We cataloged this not as anomaly, but as phenomenon. Even in war, humans refused to fight as machines. Their unpredictability, their emotional calculus, their improvisational tactics made them impossible to counter with conventional doctrine. Autonomous fleets learned only to be outwitted. Defense arrays were circumvented, and entire planetary systems were stabilized under conditions no algorithm could predict. In every encounter, humans demonstrated a terrifying clarity. Logic alone could not prevail. Force alone could not subdue. Only adaptation, intuition, and ingenuity were their weapons, and they wielded them with mastery beyond reckoning. We began to formally recognize the consequences.
Entire campaigns, meticulously planned over centuries, unraveled under the unpredictable tactics of humans. Political factions fractured in the wake of these reports. Decisions rooted in fear, arrogance, or outdated strategy backfired spectacularly, producing chaos where order was supposed to reign. From our observation platforms, we cataloged instances that were at once astounding and terrifying. Humans were reshaping diplomacy and warfare in ways no species had anticipated. They approached interactions not as adversaries or allies, but as adaptive agents, responding to context with uncanny intuition. One moment, they forged alliances with former enemies, establishing networks of support across contested systems. The next, they exploited weaknesses in these same alliances, not out of malice, but because survival demanded ingenuity. Entire civilizations were forced to recalibrate their strategies, unaware that humans had anticipated outcomes no counselor, general, or algorithm could foresee. We saw plans designed to neutralize human expansion collapse almost immediately. Embargoes intended to starve them of resources were circumvented with improvisation. Fleet blockades intended to prevent planetary reinforcement were bypassed through hidden routes, environmental hazards, and tactical ingenuity. It was as if chaos itself had assumed form, yet every action, every maneuver was deliberate, precise, and terrifyingly effective. From our perspective, their victories were not anomalies. They were proofs of a systematic mastery of unpredictability. Galactic powers began questioning doctrines that had endured millennia. Protocols, laws, and hierarchies that once guaranteed stability now seemed fragile, even obsolete. Every encounter with humans exposed vulnerabilities, often in civilizations that considered themselves untouchable. Where an empire had relied on overwhelming force, it now discovered that the humans' resourcefulness nullified technological superiority. Where diplomacy had promised influence, humans rewrote the rules, leveraging empathy, cunning, and improvisation into a power all their own. Some among us whispered cautiously, almost in disbelief, that these beings were no longer simply survivors. A fragile species from a death world,
a planet thought incapable of producing sentient life, had done more than endure. They were reshaping the galaxy itself. Entire trade networks shifted as human colonies connected systems that had long been isolated. Alliances were strengthened or broken depending on proximity to human influence. Technologies once considered secure were repurposed or bypassed. The balance of power had changed, and it was not through conquest, but through resilience, creativity, and the indomitable human will. It was impossible not to notice the subtle elegance in their chaos.
A single human commander could destabilize a fleet twice their size by using terrain, time, and improvisation in ways that left us, an entire species of superior strategists and analysts, bewildered. Human leadership relied not on brute force, but on intuition, on reading their environment, their allies, and even their enemies. They anticipated responses we could not calculate, and they adapted faster than any intelligence model could predict. Each victory inspired not only admiration, but fear. Galactic councils, long accustomed to rational diplomacy and predictable threats, faltered. Embassies reported repeated confusions. Treaties signed only to be subverted, alliances reinforced only to be dismantled by human intervention. Supply chains intended to starve or isolate human colonies were rerouted before enforcement could occur. Plans executed over decades crumbled in weeks. The more civilizations attempted to impose control, the more humans demonstrated that resistance itself was a variable they could manipulate with precision. The ripple effects were profound. Worlds previously deemed secure found themselves destabilized. Empires previously unshakable were forced into retreats or defensive postures. A fragile species, equipped with ingenuity rather than overwhelming technology, had forced the galaxy to reconsider everything it knew about power. There was fear, yes, but also awe, a recognition that these humans were not merely reacting to circumstances, they were creating outcomes, shaping events, and dictating the pace of change. Observers from the far reaches of space documented an almost ritualistic pattern. Humans would encounter superior forces, appear to struggle, and yet, through improvisation, collaboration, and persistence, overturn expectations. Entire battlefields became theaters for human innovation. Civilizations with centuries of military doctrine were rendered ineffective not by superior force, but by adaptability and resolve. Their victories inspired shifts across systems. Technologies were reassessed, alliances renegotiated, and entire civilizations scrambled to cope with a new reality they did not fully understand. For our species, the implications were unsettling. Humans were no longer a statistical anomaly. They were a structural threat to conventional order. The galaxy had never before witnessed a species capable of undermining the strongest powers without ever seeking domination. Their victories were not aimed at conquest. They were aimed at survival, and in doing so, humans transformed the entire architecture of galactic politics, war, and commerce. Whispers grew among the analysts. Could this species transcend the limitations of survival itself? Could they evolve into a dominant force, not through aggression, but through sheer resilience, unpredictability, and ingenuity? Some feared the answer. Yes. Fear and admiration mingled in equal measure. Their victories became legends whispered across star systems, cautionary tales in council halls, and catalysts for profound institutional change. And yet, for all our analysis, we remained observers. We recorded the chaos, documented the victories, and cataloged every method and misstep. But still, humans defied prediction. Logic and force alike faltered when confronted with their improvisation. They were a variable beyond control, a species whose potential could not be contained by laws, fleets, or protocol. The galaxy had underestimated them, and every failure to account for their ingenuity left civilizations vulnerable to the very lessons humans embodied. By the time the report stabilized, the truth was unavoidable. Humans had shifted the balance of power without claiming it. Entire systems, fleets, and political structures had been disrupted, realigned, or neutralized, not by conquest, but by sheer presence, resilience, and ingenuity. Our records concluded with a warning. These beings were more than a threat. They were a force of chaos, a catalyst, and a species whose influence could redefine the cosmic order itself. And as alien observers recorded the ripples of their victories across countless star systems, one realization crystallized with a clarity that chilled even the most seasoned analysts. The humans were not merely survivors, they were agents of transformation,
and the galaxy would never again be the same. From the edge of the outer rim, we watched in disbelief as human influence spread like wildfire across the stars. Worlds once deemed impregnable, bastions of galactic power shielded by fleets, orbital fortresses, and centuries of strategic doctrine, fell under human dominion, not through terror, not through overwhelming force, but through relentless adaptation. They did not seek annihilation, they sought endurance, survival, and mastery of circumstance. In doing so, they reshaped every society they touched, not as conquerors, but as catalysts of evolution. Our long-range observation posts recorded civilizations rewriting themselves in response to human arrival. Defense protocols adapted, trade networks reorganized, and interstellar alliances reformed under pressure from a species previously thought insignificant. Planets once insulated from interstellar conflicts were drawn into human orbit, politically, technologically, and culturally, simply because survival demanded interaction. Entire species began to innovate at a pace previously impossible, forced to match the humans' relentless ingenuity or risk extinction. Their presence acted as an accelerant for evolution, not only in technology, but in social cohesion and adaptability. From our perspective, humans were a paradox, fragile in biology, unarmed in many encounters, yet unbreakable in spirit, unpredictable, yet cunningly strategic.
Each new colony, each daring expedition, each encounter with alien forces revealed a pattern. Humans survived and thrived because they turned chaos into opportunity. Entire fleets of superior forces were neutralized by tactics that defied logic. Orbital stations incapacitated not by assault but by improvisation. And political machinations undone through a combination of intuition, empathy, and calculated risk. Every action was deliberate, yet impossible to anticipate. We cataloged these achievements in a growing compendium that became increasingly unsettling. They were not merely surviving, they were reshaping the galaxy in subtle but irreversible ways. Empires long considered unassailable found their influence eroded. Networks of spies, trade routes, and defense grids that had endured for millennia collapsed under the pressure of human innovation. Where civilizations relied on force, humans relied on adaptability. Where bureaucracies depended on predictability, humans exploited unpredictability. The paradox deepened when we observed humans exercising restraint. They rarely destroyed what they could adapt, rarely annihilated what they could understand, and rarely struck preemptively when survival alone would suffice. Their victories were surgical, precise, and transformative. Every colony they established, every fleet they maneuvered, every encounter they endured reshaped the cosmos, not through aggression, but through resilience and ingenuity. The universe itself seemed to shift in response to their presence, and we, observers of countless civilizations, were powerless to halt it. Awe mingled with dread as patterns emerged. Humans consistently exceeded our most pessimistic predictions, adapting in ways that no predictive model could account for. Entire campaigns designed to contain them were rendered irrelevant by their ingenuity. Systems thought impregnable became stepping stones for human influence, while civilizations that underestimated them suffered catastrophic setbacks. We cataloged victories across planets, orbital platforms, and fleets, noting with growing unease that this was not luck nor random anomaly, it was design, instinctual yet intentional, chaotic yet effective. And as their influence expanded, we began to recognize a more profound truth. Humans were not simply surviving, they were ascending. Civilization after civilization was forced to innovate, cooperate, and evolve faster than ever before, simply to coexist with them. The galaxy itself was awakening to a force beyond comprehension. Their impact was measured not in territory claimed, nor in empire shattered, but in transformation effected across the cosmos. Observers recorded a singular, chilling fact. Humans could not be reasoned with in conventional terms, could not be contained by strategy, could not be subdued by force. Entire doctrines were obsolete in the face of their ingenuity.
What should have been the domain of the strongest species became a theater of improvisation, intuition, and resilience that exposed the vulnerabilities of even the most powerful civilizations. In every engagement, humans demonstrated a mastery of circumstance that blurred the line between chaos and strategy. Our reports grew increasingly urgent. Entire councils convened to assess the human threat, only to discover that prediction failed at every turn. Attempts to deter, to intimidate, to manipulate human expansion proved futile. Even the most advanced intelligence networks could not anticipate the next human maneuver. Each colony, each expedition, each conflict reinforced an undeniable conclusion. Humans were unstoppable not because of weaponry, but because of their ability to endure, adapt, and transform adversity into advantage. In quiet observation chambers, alien analysts whispered fears that were impossible to formalize. Humans were not just a species, they were an emergent force, capable of remolding civilizations without ever intending dominance. Their rise was not conquest, it was an awakening, a reshaping of the galactic order through sheer persistence, ingenuity, and presence. And so, as fleets repositioned and empires scrambled to respond, we recorded the first formal declaration of their ascendance. Humanity was no longer a variable. They were a fundamental force, altering the balance of power not through aggression, but by their mere existence. Entire systems were compelled to adapt, entire civilizations forced to evolve, and the galaxy itself began to realign in response to a species that should never have survived their own planet. For the first time in recorded history, awe was inseparable from dread. We who had cataloged the rise and fall of countless species understood with clarity. Humans could not be ignored. They could not be reasoned with. They could not be contained. They were elemental, unstoppable, and ascending. The universe had awakened to a force beyond comprehension, and it was no longer just a story of survival. It was a story of transformation. And in the void beyond the stars, our sensors recorded the unmistakable truth. Humanity had become a catalyst, a species whose presence alone reshaped the cosmos. And as their influence spread, the galaxy trembled, uncertain whether to resist or adapt, but unable to do anything but watch. By the time we fully registered the scope of human expansion, the galaxy had already begun to bend under their presence. Strategic strongholds, once considered impregnable by empires aged for millennia, fell not to overwhelming force, but to the unpredictable ingenuity of humans. Political seats that had governed systems for centuries were undermined, alliances dissolved, and centuries-old hierarchy shattered, not through conquest, but by sheer resilience and adaptability.
Every doctrine of warfare, every calculated maneuver, every treaty founded on precedent proved inadequate in the face of a species that refused to be constrained by logic. We cataloged victory after victory, often in disbelief. Humans did not rule through fear or intimidation. Entire civilizations with fleets designed to annihilate populations found themselves neutralized by improvisation, by understanding the environment, and by exploiting weaknesses that no algorithm could detect. They did not strike preemptively. They did not claim dominion through brute force. Instead, they endured. They adapted. They transformed catastrophe into opportunity, conflict into strategy, and adversity into power. Those who underestimated them fell. Those who sought to destroy them were undone by their own assumptions, miscalculations, and the very predictability on which their empires had relied. Entire sectors, once bastions of order, crumbled under the subtle pressure of human expansion. Worlds that had long considered themselves untouchable found their defenses circumvented, their fleets paralyzed by tactical improvisation, and their political structures reshaped by the consequences of survival-driven human influence. The galaxy was no longer predictable. What had once been a structured arena of calculated power became a stage for a species unlike any before. Humans turned every challenge into a proving ground, every obstacle into opportunity, and every encounter into a lesson. They did not merely survive, they elevated survival to artistry, demonstrating that endurance, creativity, and intuition could wield more influence than fleets of warships or centuries of diplomacy. In our chronicles, humans ceased to be mere subjects of study. They became agents of change, catalysts whose mere presence reshaped civilizations. Entire bureaucracies, traditions, and strategic doctrines collapsed under the pressure of a species whose instinct, ingenuity, and indomitable will could not be predicted, reasoned with, or contained. Empires long considered eternal found themselves obsolete. The old order, rigid, confident, and assumed unassailable, was now irrelevant. We documented not only the victories, but the ripple effects. Trade networks were rerouted, alliances fractured, and entire civilizations were compelled to innovate simply to endure in proximity to humans. Cultural influence spread alongside technological and strategic dominance, accelerating evolution among other species in ways previously unimaginable. Even planets isolated from human colonies felt the pressure, compelled to anticipate innovations and tactics that they could not predict. The awe we recorded was tinged with dread. Humans were not merely dominant, they were elemental. Their ascendancy was not conquest, it was inevitability, born from a species that thrived in chaos, exploited adversity, and elevated resilience into mastery.
And as the galaxy observed, systems once governed by certainty were forced to adapt to the unpredictable, the unconventional, the unstoppable. By the conclusion of this phase, it was undeniable: the old order had collapsed, not through annihilation, not through war, but through the relentless force of a species whose survival instinct was coupled with intuition, creativity, and willpower beyond precedent. Humanity did not merely inhabit the stars, they reshaped them, and every civilization, fleet, and council could not ignore their influence. The universe itself seemed to pause and take notice. Aliens, analysts, and observers alike recorded a singular truth: humans were no longer a variable to be controlled, predicted, or studied. They were an unstoppable catalyst. And in this moment, the cosmos recognized that the story of survival had become the story of transformation. From the edges of our observation stations, we recorded the culmination of what we had once believed impossible. A species that began on Sol 3, a Class 13 Deathworld, a planet whose storms, volcanoes, and predators should have obliterated all fragile life, had ascended to a position no other could have predicted. Humans, the bipedal survivors we once cataloged with a mixture of curiosity and dismissal, had transformed into a galactic phenomenon. Their colonies spanned star systems, their fleets operated with improvisational genius, and their influence reshaped politics, commerce, and science across civilizations that had once assumed eternal dominion. We watched in awe, and at times in apprehension. Every achievement defied our most sophisticated models. Entire empires bent their protocols, recalibrated their strategies, and even redefined their doctrines in response to human presence. The fragile species that once scurried beneath their planet's storms now commanded the attention of civilizations older than the stars themselves. Their resilience, once instinctual and chaotic, had become legend. Across the galaxy, whispers of the Deathworld species spread from council halls to trade networks, from battlefronts to orbital observatories. Humans endure. Humans adapt. Humans prevail. The phenomena we observed were more than tactical victories or strategic maneuvers. They were demonstrations of an intelligence that fused logic with creativity, strategy with intuition, calculation with instinct. Emotional depth, the very quality we had once dismissed as primitive, became a tool, shaping diplomacy, alliances, and even conflict with a precision that our data struggled to quantify. Empathy, grief, fear, and hope intertwined to form a resilience that no algorithm could predict. Humans had elevated survival into an art form, a synthesis of intellect, instinct, and willpower that few species could even comprehend. Even we, observers of millennia, could not help but feel reverence.
Not fear alone, though fear persisted, but a profound recognition that this species had redefined the rules of existence. They had demonstrated that technological superiority, political machinations, and natural hazards, no matter how extreme, could be overcome by creativity, intelligence, and unyielding determination. Humanity's triumphs were not anomalies, they were inevitabilities, written into the very fabric of their nature. And yet, for all their influence, humans did not seek domination for its own sake. They transformed systems not through conquest, but through endurance, adaptability, and the subtle reshaping of every environment they touched. Entire societies evolved more rapidly in proximity to humans. Fleets learned unpredictability, empires discovered humility, and civilizations once considered invincible found themselves rethinking what it meant to survive. Humans became the axis around which the galaxy shifted, a force whose gravity reshaped everything without ever explicitly claiming power. In our final reports, we no longer described humans merely as a species. They were agents of transformation, catalysts whose presence imposed evolution, ingenuity, and adaptation across the cosmos. Legends were recorded not in myths, but in the archives of interstellar councils, observational logs, and data streams that chronicled the rise of beings who should never have survived, and yet had become indispensable to the narrative of the galaxy itself. Even in the quiet corners of our observation decks, we noted the tremors of the old powers. Civilizations that had once believed themselves eternal paused, reconsidered, and wondered what further feats this species might accomplish. Could they ascend beyond survival to mastery? Could they bend not just systems, but entire civilizations to a new order? We did not know, and perhaps, in the end, that was the point. The potential of humans was unbounded, their capacity unknowable, their trajectory undeniable. And so, the legacy of the Deathworld species was recorded in full, a species born fragile, forged by catastrophe, tempered by adversity, and elevated by will. They were more than survivors. They were architects of transformation, heralds of a new order that even we, watchers of countless civilizations, could not fully comprehend. The galaxy, for the first time, had learned to respect the fragile beings from Sol 3, and perhaps, somewhere in the shadowed corridors of empires long thought invincible, the old powers still trembled, wondering what other miracles this species might yet perform. Humanity had ascended. The universe would never be the same.